Question 1. The staff at your local leisure centre have decided to organise classes and clubs to help the community remain fit and healthy. You've been asked to write an article for a local newspaper to inform residents of these plans. You need to explain why it is important for people to take exercise, what activities are available, and any other details that people would find helpful. Write the article. The article should be between 250 and 350 words. Okay, so this is an example of a question that you could be given in your Open Awards writing exam for Functional Skills Level 2. And remember that when we face a question like this, we need to highlight the key details like I've just done there. So if you're doing Open Awards, the chances are you'll be doing your exam online, so you can't particularly highlight the question, but it's a good idea to just note down the key details. So those are our text type, which here is an article. Then we should be thinking about the formatting features that we need for that, which we'll go on to when we look at the mark scheme. Then we need to think about the audience. So here it's a local newspaper, so local newspaper readers are going to be our audience. So then that should inform our formality. So if we're writing for local newspaper readers, we need to make sure that we're writing relatively formally. And then we need to think about the purpose as well. So here it's to inform residents of these plans. So if we're writing to inform, we need to use quite explanatory, detailed language, and also maybe some facts and figures to give information to the reader. We also need to see if there's a word count. So here there is 250 and 350 words. And then this bit here is our detail. So we need to make sure that we're going into detail on each one of these things. So explaining why it's important to people to take exercise. So think of a few different reasons, try and expand upon them. What activities are available. So don't just list a couple of activities, try and list a few activities and think about the benefits that those activities might bring to people as well, just to add a bit more detail to your answer. And then any other details people would find helpful, we can use our own imagination for that. So maybe something about opening times would be useful to include. We've got 30 marks for this question, and that will be the case for both of the questions on your writing exam. And when we look at the mark scheme, we'll go into a bit more detail about how we get those 30 marks and where they all come from. Okay, so we're going to have a little look at the mark scheme then for all writing questions. Now, how this is fulfilled will depend on the few things that we've looked at already in the question. So what text type you're writing, the purpose and the audience of your text. So make sure that you know all of that before you start writing. So the first point in our mark scheme is clarity. So this just means that making sure your answer is clear throughout is really important. So being able to write in clear, coherent sentences that are grammatically correct will contribute to this. Making sure that any spelling errors don't affect the examiner being able to actually understand what the word says. And also planning your answer can help with this, so making sure that it has a clear logical structure and the order of things that you're writing down are logical. Next we've got detail, so this refers to kind of the length of your answer and the amount of detail that you're including. So first thing to note with this is if you do have a word count in the question, make sure that you stick to that. It's a really good idea to practice writing around 250 to 350 word answers before the exam, because you won't get a word counter in the exam. So you'll need to know kind of how many paragraphs roughly that is going to be and what it looks like on the page. If you don't have a word count, you still need to make sure that you're expanding upon all of the things that they've included in the question. So make sure that you read that question really carefully. This level of detail also needs to meet the purpose and the audience. So for example, if your text is trying to explain, you need to include enough detail to meet that purpose. So lots of facts and information. We've also got format. Now this will be different depending on whatever text type that you're writing, but each text type has specific essential formatting features that you need to include. So make sure you're comfortable with all of those before you go into your exam. We've also got visual organisation. So for this we need to be able to use organisational markers effectively. So these are words that help your writing flow better. So just to give you a few examples, we've got words like firstly, secondly, as well as, therefore, despite, however, and so on. So make sure you're comfortable with using words like those to make your writing flow better. You also get marks here for using visual organisational features, so things like bullet points are a really good thing to include. Also make sure that you're using subheadings, paragraphs, headings, if they're appropriate for the text type that you're writing. But you do need to use paragraphs in every single text that you write. Next we've got register and language. So this mainly refers to the level of formality in your writing. So making sure that you know whether your audience requires formal language or more informal language. This might also depend on the text type as well. So if you're writing a leaflet, you might be able to be a little bit more informal than if you're writing a letter or a report. But make sure that you look at the audience and the purpose to decide the level of formality that you need to use in your writing. Next we've got construction. So this refers to complex sentences and paragraphs. So make sure that you're splitting your work up into paragraphs. You can use the question to help you with this as well. You can sort of do a paragraph on each thing that they ask you to write about and expand upon. Then complex sentences are a type of sentence that we use in our writing, where we have two or more parts of the sentence and one or more of those parts doesn't make sense on its own, so it needs the next part of the sentence to make it make sense. Now, don't worry if that's a little bit confusing at this stage. We will have a look at complex sentences when we look at the model answer. But essentially, you just want to try and write different types of sentences. So again, using organisational markers to help your writing flow better and to start sentences with different words is really helpful. Then we've got spelling. So with spelling, it's really important to spell a range of words correctly. So try and broaden your vocabulary and learn any spellings you know you struggle with. You also need to try and include some specialist words in your writing. So depending on what the topic is, a specialist word is a word that is only to do with that topic or it's specific to that topic. So for example, if we had to write an article on healthy eating, we might include lots of specialist terms like protein, carbohydrate, and so on. Next we've got punctuation. So again, same as with spelling, we need to include a wide range of punctuation. So try and get as much complex punctuation as you can in your answer. So commas, apostrophes, colons, and then even some quotation marks if you can as well. You also need to make sure that your punctuation at the beginning and end of your sentences is correct. So capital letters at the start and full stops to end sentences, or question marks and exclamation marks if they're needed. Then finally we've got grammar. So grammar refers to making sure that your sentences are constructed correctly and they all make sense. So again, we need to use correct and complex grammar. So this includes the subject-verb agreement, making sure that the subject of your sentence matches with the verb, the doing word, making sure you're using articles correctly, so a, an, or the, depending on which one is correct in the context of your sentence. We also need to use modality devices, which is basically just modal verbs, so words like could, should, must, can, and would, to give you a few examples. And we also need to use a variety of different tenses for grammar. So try and write in the present tense and also the past tense, and then if you can also write in the future tense. So those are the three tenses you need to try and write in. Okay, so here is the model solution then for the first question that we've already read at the start of this video. So just to remind you, we are being asked to write an article for a local newspaper to inform residents of the plans to open some classes and clubs to help the community remain fit and healthy. We need to write between 250 and 350 words. Okay, so what makes this a really good answer then? Well, let's go through the mark scheme and see where it's being fulfilled for each SOS point. So firstly, starting with clarity. So remember, this means that your answer needs to make sense and follow a clear structure throughout. So we've definitely got that here. They've used the question to help them structure their answer. So if you look in this part of the question, we've got the different things that they want us to include, and that this is given to you in a logical order in the question already, so it helps to use this order in your answer, which the student has done here. So they've started off by introducing what they're going to talk about with this couple of sentences at the start. Then they've gone through, talked about why exercise is important and what activities are available, and then any additional details as well. So it's really logical, all of the sentences make sense, and there's no ambiguity present, so it's really clear throughout. In terms of detail, the answer is at an appropriate length, so we've got around 300 words here, and all of the details that we're asked to include in the question have been talked about but also expanded upon to an appropriate level of detail. So just to give you an example, they've talked about why exercise is important, but they've gone into detail about that. So they've talked about physical benefits, but also mental benefits as well. So try and go into enough detail and expand upon those points that they give you in the question. In terms of the format, remember this is an article, so we need to include a main title. New fitness classes available in Everwood. Again, this doesn't have to be clever or witty. You don't need to spend ages thinking about a title for your article. Just use the question, think about what your article is going to be about and use that as your title. We also need an author's name, which we've got here. And we also need subheadings throughout as well. Again, you can use the question to help you with those subheadings as well. We've also got this, stay fit and healthy with our new community classes. This is what we call a strapline as well, which Open Awards do like you to use. This is just a sort of extra subheading underneath your main title to give you a little bit more information about what your article is going to be about. Moving on then to thinking about visual organisation. So we've got lots of organisational markers throughout. So these are words or phrases that join your sentences together, or also good ways to start sentences as well. So we've got words like and used to connect sentences together. And we've also got the word which down here to show that adds detail to the sentence and joins them together. We've also got some really good visual organisation on here. So bullet points are a really good one to use and get your marks for visual organisation. So they're a good one to get in most texts that you will write. We've also got paragraphs used throughout, and also our subheadings to help split up the text and make it more visually appealing and easy to navigate. In terms of the register and language, remember that this needs to be suited to our audience. So our audience are readers of the local newspaper. So quite a formal audience. Newspapers tend to be more formal text types, so we want to use formal language, and we've definitely got that here. We've got words in their full form, for example, we are rather than the shortened version, we're. We've got generally formal language and some specialist words, for example, strengthen muscles and bones, improve cardiovascular health. And we haven't got any slang terms either that would be much more informal, or any casual language. Then if we think about construction, remember for this you get marks for writing in paragraphs that are well constructed, and also writing varied sentence structures, including some complex sentences. So in terms of paragraphs, we've got really well split up paragraphs. Each paragraph has its own point or topic. And then in terms of sentence structures, we've got lots of different sentence structures throughout. We've got a complex sentence here, for example. To join a class or club, simply visit Energy's reception or telephone this number. So we've got two parts to that sentence, separated by this comma in the middle, and this first part doesn't make sense on its own. It needs the next part of the sentence to make it make sense. So that's how we construct a complex sentence. If you're not sure on complex sentences and constructing different sentence types, make sure you go back and look at your revision on that. And then finally, let's see how spelling, punctuation and grammar have been fulfilled on this model answer. So in terms of spelling, all of the spelling is correct throughout here, but remember that's not necessarily enough to get you the 4 marks in your exam. We need to be spelling complex and irregular and ideally specialist words correctly as well. So it's more to do with the range of words that you're spelling and those being correct, which is going to get you those 4 marks. So just to give you a few examples, we've got some more harder to spell words spelled correctly. So example would be words with double letters, for example, committed, and also illnesses, and also equipped down here. Then we've got some more complex, harder to spell words that aren't spelt phonetically. So what we mean by that is that they're not spelt how we would say them out loud. So physically would be a good example of that. We've got the PH at the start, which makes that F sound. And also down here we've got environment, which has the silent N in the middle as well. And then finally we've got some specialist words. So when you get the topic in your exam questions, so here the topic is exercise and generally being healthy, try and think about some specialist words that are to do with that topic and see if you can slot a few of those into your writing, because this is going to really impress the examiner if you're spelling these correctly. So to give you a couple of examples from here, we've got muscles and bones, we've also got cardiovascular and weight as well. So not only are these specialist words, but also they're quite difficult to spell words as well. In terms of punctuation, we've got accurate and varied punctuation throughout. Similarly to spelling, it's not enough to just use full stops and capital letters correctly to get you the 4 marks. We need to use complex punctuation. So make sure that you're aware of the different types of punctuation you need to use. So these are ideally colons, commas, inverted commas, apostrophes and quotation marks. Now it might be quite hard to get all of those in, but you should be aiming for sort of at least 3 of those to be used throughout your answer. So remember, with apostrophes, we have 2 types of apostrophes, possessive and apostrophes for contractions. Contractions tend to be quite informal, so we're writing formally here, so we want to use the other apostrophe, which has apostrophes for possession. So here we've got one here, so energies, classes. So what this is saying here in effect is the classes belonging to energy or the classes at energy, but we've reworded that using a possessive apostrophe. We've also got commas used correctly throughout to join sentences together and separate the different parts of them. So for example, we've got this sentence down here: to join a class or club, simply visit Energy's reception or telephone this number. So we've got 2 parts to this sentence. We've got a comma in the middle there to separate them. If you struggle to know when to use commas in your writing, reading your work out loud is really helpful, because it'll allow you to know when you would naturally pause or take a breath in the sentence, and that's usually where a comma would go. We've also got some colons used, so to introduce these bullet points, and also within the bullet points as well. So remember, the colon is used to introduce something. So within each bullet point, the colon is used to introduce more information about what that class is going to involve. We've also got capital letters and full stops used correctly throughout. Then finally, looking at grammar. Remember, grammar needs to be accurate, but we also need to use complex grammar structures throughout our answer. So this includes the subject-verb agreement being correct, using a variety of tenses, using definite and indefinite articles where needed, and also modal verbs. So I'm just going to point out where those things are being used. So in terms of the subject-verb agreement, this is where the verb of the sentence, so the doing word, needs to match up with the subject. So if we've got a plural subject, we need to have a verb that matches with that. If we've got a singular subject, we need to have a verb that matches with that. So just to give you an example, we've got here, we are committed. So here the subject is we, so that is plural. So therefore the verb are, which is part of the verb to be, matches that. If we had a singular subject here, so he or she, we would have the singular verb, which is. In terms of tenses, we've got a lot of this is written in the present tense. So Energy Leisure Centre are excited to announce. So presently they are excited to announce. And we've also got down here some future tense. So all classes and clubs will be held at Energy Leisure Centre. So that word will shows that it's in the future, something that's going to happen. In terms of definite and indefinite articles, we've got an indefinite article used here. Swimming is a low impact exercise. So the indefinite article a is used there because we're just talking about swimming generally and what sort of exercise it is generally. It's also not the only low impact exercise. So if we said swimming is the low impact exercise, that wouldn't make sense here because there are other low impact exercises. We've also got a definite article down here where it says the new classes, and that's because they're talking about the specific classes that they've referred to throughout the article. Then finally we've got some modal verbs used. So can here is used to express the ability to do something, so you can also visit energyleisure.com. And we've also got will used as well. Will is also a modal verb. So these classes will be fun, high energy sessions. So overall, this is a really strong answer, and all parts of the mark scheme have been fulfilled. Okay, so now let's look at question 2. Remember, in your writing exam, you'll have 2 of these type of questions to answer, so make sure that you do both of them. You recently took a relative on holiday. Your relative has limited mobility, so you checked in advance that the hotel would be suitable. However, once you arrived, you discovered that the hotel was not suitable and you had to go elsewhere. You decide to email the hotel manager to complain about your experience, explaining what was wrong with the hotel and what problems were caused by having to move. You should state what you expect the hotel to do. So before we start breaking down this question, I'm just going to point out a phrase in the question that you might not be sure what it means. So your relative has limited mobility. Now, this is why it's a really good idea to look at past papers, so you can come across any phrases like these that you're not sure what they mean and try and broaden your vocabulary before you go into the exam. So this phrase, limited mobility. So when you're not sure what a phrase means, it can be helpful to break down the 2 words. So limited means to have not much of something. Mobility refers to being mobile. So if we're mobile, it means that we can move around easily. So if someone has limited mobility, it just means that they can't move around very easily. Okay, so again, we've highlighted or noted down the key details of this question. So first is the text type. So here we're being asked to write an email. So we'll have a look at what formatting features we need for an email as well when we look at the model solution. Our audience here is the hotel manager. So this should inform our formality, our language and register. Now, this is quite a formal audience. It's a professional person who we don't know about something quite serious, so we want to use formal language. Our purpose here is to complain and also to explain as well. So don't be confused if you see this word complain. That still means that you need to remain polite. So don't use an aggressive tone or anything like that. We want to still remain polite and professional and formal. All of this contextual information is really important to include as well, so make sure that you've read that and you've understood kind of why you were unhappy with the hotel. We don't actually have a word count for this question. It would come here if we did. So that doesn't mean that you can write significantly less than you would if there was a word count. You should still be aiming for sort of 3 good sized paragraphs, and make sure that you expand on these points in the question as much as you can. So here is the written solution then for this question. So remember that we need to think about all of the elements of the mark scheme that we've gone through already. So I'm just going to show you where each part of the mark scheme has been fulfilled in this model answer. So firstly, looking at clarity, this means that our answer needs to make sense. It needs to be in a logical order. And we've definitely got that here. They've opened by explaining why they're writing. That's a really good way to open a letter or an email. Then each of the paragraphs come in a logical order, so they explain the issues that they had, then they explain the consequences of those issues, and then they explain kind of what they want the hotel to do about it. So the answer is really clear throughout. Next, thinking about detail. Now remember, we don't have a word count for this task. However, we've got sufficient detail on everything that we're asked to write about in the question. So here we're asked to complain about our experience, explain what was wrong with the hotel, what problems were caused by having to move, and what you expect the hotel to do. So the student here has kind of done a paragraph on each of those and expanded upon them. So we haven't just got one problem with the hotel with not much detail. We've got a couple. So the bathroom lacked the necessary grab bars to support people with limited mobility, and the doorway was too narrow for my grandmother's wheelchair to pass through. Secondly, there were steps leading to the main entrance and the lift was out of order. This made it extremely difficult for my grandma to move around the hotel. So here they've explained what was wrong with the hotel and also why it was wrong. So in relation to the lack of mobility, what problems it caused and why it wasn't suitable. So we've got a good level of detail throughout. In terms of the format, remember it's an email, so we've got our to-line. The email address was actually given to us in the question, so make sure you look out for that to see if you're given an address or an email address in questions that ask you to write letters and emails. Then we've got our subject, so this should summarise what our email is going to be about. We've got our appropriate greeting, dear hotel manager. Then we've got our answer written in paragraphs, and we've also got our sign off at the end and followed by the sender's name. So for an email, kind regards is a good sign off for if you're writing formally. Best wishes or best is a little bit more informal. Moving on to visual organisation. So we have used lots of organisational markers throughout here. So for example, firstly and secondly, they're really useful for showing the order of things that happened. We've also got due to, which links the paragraph before with this paragraph really well, and also following this inconvenience. So the answer is really well linked with organisational markers. We don't have many visual organisational markers on here. We've got paragraphs, the answer is written in, and we've got our correct formatting features. We could possibly improve this by adding some bullet points to the answer. But if you do choose to use bullet points, make sure that you don't compromise on the level of detail in your answer because of that. In terms of the register and language, remember this is a formal audience, so we need to use formal writing. So we've got a lack of contractions, for example, I am writing rather than the shortened version I'm. Generally formal phrasing, so for example, the bathroom lacked the necessary grab bars. This is much more formal than saying the bathroom didn't have, for example. Notice that although we are asked to complain, the tone here is still polite. So we're explaining that it caused significant inconvenience and stress, but we don't have an aggressive tone or anything impolite in here. Then in terms of construction, as we've already mentioned, we've got really well constructed paragraphs throughout, which each have a different topic. Remember that you can use the question to help you with this, so we can split this up into different paragraphs, explain what was wrong with the hotel in the first paragraph, explain what problems were caused by having to move in the second paragraph, and then state or explain what you expect the hotel to do. So that's an easy way to split up your paragraphs if you're struggling. Then in terms of complex sentences as well and varied sentence structures, we've got a really nice complex sentence here. Due to these issues, we were forced to leave and find another hotel at extremely short notice, thus causing significant inconvenience and stress. So we've got three parts to this sentence, separated by the commas here. And some of these parts of this sentence don't make sense without the rest of the sentence. So due to these issues wouldn't make sense on its own. For example, it needs this part to show what it means. So try and practice constructing complex sentences if it's something that you struggle with. Also, just by thinking of more interesting organisational markers to use and ways to start your sentences, sometimes you'll do a complex sentence without even realising it. So if we take this example, following this inconvenience, I expect a full refund for our booking due to the unsuitable conditions and the trouble caused. So this sentence would make sense if we just said I expect a full refund for our booking, but we've made it much more interesting by linking it to the previous paragraph using this phrase here, and by doing that it also becomes a complex sentence. So practicing more interesting ways to start your sentences is a really good idea as well. Then finally, let's look at spelling, punctuation and grammar. So remember, for spelling, in order to get full marks, we need to have consistent use of complex and specialist words and spelt correctly throughout. So just to give you a few examples, we've got words like specifically, accommodate, and also inconvenience. So high level words there that are quite difficult to spell. We've also got some specialist terminology in here that's spelt correctly. So the question is surrounding limited mobility. So we've got words like wheelchair spelt correctly, and also accessible or accessibility and mobility. Next, thinking about punctuation. Remember, again, our punctuation needs to be varied and accurate throughout. So just to start off, we've got capital letters and full stops where they should be. Then in terms of our more complex punctuation, we've got commas that are used really well and accurately throughout. To give you an example, we've got this sentence. However, when we arrived, it became clear that the hotel was not suitable for my grandmother's needs. So here we've got a comma used to surround this extra information. So when we arrived is extra information, and the sentence would make sense without it. So the commas are used to separate that section from the rest of the sentence. We've also got a possessive apostrophe used in the same sentence, my grandmother's needs, the needs belonging to my grandmother. Again, remember, possessive apostrophes can be used in any text, but contractions should only be used in informal texts. We've also got another possessive apostrophe down here, your hotel's facilities. We could improve this in terms of punctuation by adding some colons or a colon to introduce ideas, and also possibly some inverted commas, so we could use the name of the hotel in inverted commas as well. But overall, the punctuation is all accurate, and we have got some really good, accurate, complex punctuation as well. Okay, and then finally we want to think about the grammar that's used here. So we've got accurate grammar throughout, but also complex grammar structures used. So remember, if you're looking to get 4 marks for grammar, you need to make sure that you're using complex grammar structures that I'm going to go through now. So firstly is the subject-verb agreement, so making sure that this is consistently accurate throughout your answer. So just to give you an example, we've got I suggest down here. I suggest that you review your hotel's facilities. We've got suggest, which is our doing word, our verb, and I is our subject, it's doing the verb. And these two are matched with each other. Next, we want to think about using a variety of tenses. So here they start off in the present tense. So I am writing to complain about my recent experience at your hotel. So straight away in the present tense. Then we switch to the past tense. I booked a stay for my elderly grandmother and myself. The second paragraph is also in the past tense, speaking about what happened. So the room we were given, the bathroom lacked. And also in the third paragraph, they carry on saying we were forced. So again, in the past tense. Then towards the end, we switch back to the present tense. So I expect a full refund. I suggest. We've also got definite and indefinite articles used. For example here, the doorway. That's because they're speaking about a specific doorway that was too narrow for his grandmother's wheelchair. We've got another definite article used here, the lift was out of order. So again, speaking about that specific lift that they encountered. We've also got an indefinite article used here. So to give you an example, we've got a prompt response down here. And that's because that response doesn't exist yet. So it wouldn't make sense to say the prompt response, because that would imply that something already exists that the reader and the writer are aware of. They're requesting a prompt response that doesn't exist yet. So we use the indefinite article a there. Then finally, in terms of modal verbs, we've got one used at the bottom here. So I would like a prompt response and resolution of this matter. Would here is the modal verb. So overall, both of these answers are really strong, and hopefully after watching this video you've got a better idea of how to fulfil the writing level 2 functional skills mark scheme.